Experience Relativity.
Experience Relativity.
Experience Relativity.
Welcome to another episode of Experience Relativity podcast. And, well, I guess I'll hold up right there. It's not just another episode of the Experience Relativity podcast. It is actually the 2-year anniversary of the Experience Relativity podcast. And with time and focused intention comes growth and development. And that representation of growth and development is in video now being added, this beautiful set and lighting. And that is all for you. All right, maybe a little bit for me. So we'll say it's all for us. I love to see the development of this podcast continue. With that being said, also, we now have a website that is under construction, and there will be cool merchandise that will become available. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, getting into the podcast itself, we have a new format, and you'll kind of get the gist of it as you continue to listen. So, we'll start just with a bit of story time, and we're going to do some exploration of some perspectives about a couple of different things. And essentially, we're going to tie it together where the rubber meets the road, because ultimately, that's where we want to be. We want to be in a place of action, and we want to be moving forward and gaining traction. So, story time. So, today, I was curious. I had a question. Do you ever listen to songs as an adult and wonder, who let me listen to this song as a child? It's crazy. I was thinking about this the other day, and I've been discussing it with my best friend and a couple of other people, and it led me to two good examples, I feel like, of this scenario. When you used to love a song as a kid, sang and knew all the words to the song, and then ultimately you grew up and heard the words to the song, and you were like, my God. So the first song that I want to talk about that's like this is Push It by Salt and Pepper. Now, I may be dating myself, but I'll reveal that this song was released in 1986. So I was 3 years old at this time. And imagine me walking around my house. Mind you, grew up in a very Christian household. Secular music was almost never allowed in the household, especially for me and my brother to listen to. And I'm running around the house like, push it real good. Like, no, it was never going to fly. So the next example I have of this song came from me speaking to my best friend, and we were talking about random songs that kind of generated the same experience for her. And she's actually half Swiss, half Ghanaian. So we were discussing this, and a song immediately popped in our head. Get Low by Lil Jon. Now, imagine being in Switzerland, and I've had this experience because I had a similar experience in Barcelona, but imagine being in a club in Switzerland. Everybody speaks English. Most of the people speak English. So they're hearing this song by Lil Jon, and everybody just knows the song. And if you're not familiar with Get Low, let's just say, to the window, to the wall. And everybody knows what comes after that if you know the song. So all the folks in the club are singing this song, and my friend is present. And later, she realizes what skeet, skeet, skeet means. And she was appalled. She was appalled that people were singing this song out loud in the club. And there's probably a good number of people who had no clue what that meant. So it was really funny to have that experience with her where she realized, yeah, similar thing. So the next example and the final example is actually one that's ultra timely and ultra relevant right now. So if you don't know this jingle, this medley that has kind of taken over the US and probably the world to some degree. Uh, dun, 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 they not like us. So I'm thinking about this now, and my children are listening to this song and they know every single word to this song. So as we're watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, I'm watching, the halftime performance, and I really enjoyed the halftime performance. I enjoyed the cinematics. We ain't even gonna get into the set list, and we'll leave that off for everybody's debate everywhere other than here. But everybody was waiting for it, trying to strike a chord, and it's probably A minor. It's interesting. My kids are singing this song, and I'm like, man, they're going to grow up one day and realize they were all singing a song about a famous rapper allegedly being a pedophile. And I'm like, man, they're going to be like, who let me sing this song? Which brings me to the first side of the coin of experience. And I want to introduce the title and the theme for the month of February, which, of course, if you're in America, you know that February is Black History Month. So that's going to be tied up in the theme of our expiration during these episodes this month. And we are going to explore a song because if you listen to previous episodes, sometimes I'll weave some music in there, and I usually close with a song that fits for me. It's part of one of my little Easter eggs that I like to slide into episodes. We're going to talk about the national anthem. And I'm excited to talk about the national anthem, especially for a particular part of the national anthem. So, the part that I want to explore specifically is that portion that sort of like the peak, the land of the free and the home of the brave. So the theme for February for the Experience Relativity podcast is that the land of the free was simultaneously the home of the brave. Oh, sorry. The land of the free was simultaneously the home of the slave. That's going to be the theme for February, Black History Month. And I'll stop right there and kind of foreshadow the idea that that's okay. As we explore this topic in history, it underscores everything about America then and America now, and sort of the human experience. There's not a single one of us who hasn't lived at some point in time as a walking contradiction. And I think this period and this theme for the month of February, the land of the free, was simultaneously the home of the slave. So there we have it for the theme of this month. Let's get into it. Say, can you see? Which is one of the lyrics to the song. It's how it kicks off. So let's go into a little bit of the background of what became our national anthem. So as we move through this, I'm just going to split this into two groups: the non-enslaved Americans and the enslaved Americans during this time period. Now, when we're talking about the national anthem, let's rewind back to its origin. So the national anthem started as a poem by Francis Scott Key in 1814. First and foremost, there is a very interesting backstory. And I did a little bit of research. I didn't want to go off on a tangent. For all of you who know, I have ADHD, so I can go down a rabbit hole for a very long period of time. So I'll keep it short. Francis Scott Key was in a meeting with the British during the War of 1812. Everything went well. They dined together, had a great time. And just as it was time for them to depart, they realized that they saw British ships moving into position to attack and capture Baltimore, just as they had done with Washington. Well, naturally, Francis Scott Key saw this and he was about to depart. He had seen too much. They couldn't let him go. So they held him. The ships moved into position, the night progressed, and his assumption was he would wake up in Baltimore with a British flag flying over Fort McHenry. The night passed, the sun rose. He saw the American flag still above Fort McHenry, battered, tattered, blown to smithereens, but still there. And this inspired his poem. So as soon as he was released, which that also puzzled me because I'm just thinking it's war. So I didn't think that they would just kind of let him go, but they did. They let him go. And as the story goes, the first thing that he did was pull out a notepad and write down a poem. And that poem is what would later become our national anthem. That poem was then taken and put to music. Now, here's a very interesting fun fact about this, and I was kind of tickled when I learned this. That poem was set to music, and that music was To Anacreon in Heaven by John Stafford Smith, and that song was written in 1775. So what Francis Scott Key essentially did was he wrote a poem and then he sampled a British composer. Now, mind you, at this point, the British are the ops. So you've written a poem about how America withstood a British attack, and then you use the ops music and put your poem to it. That's gangster. That's real gangster. So I was tickled at the fact that, there's a sample in there. So it was originally titled Defense of Fort McHenry. He sampled a British composer, tied his poem to this tune, and now we have the Defense of Fort McHenry. As soon as the song got traction and grew and it was published, the name was changed to the Star-Spangled Banner. Imagine that. Name change, Star-Spangled Banner, better title, better packaging. Everybody's in it now. Next, in 1931, Herbert Hoover passed a bill or signed a bill that made the song the official national anthem of the United States. Okay, so background, because I was curious. I'm like, all right, it's a flag. I see flags every day. Yes, I see, normal flags every day, but he saw a flag that was above a fort that had been blown to smithereens by war cannons that were launched. Okay, cool. I get the significance of that. But I was curious about the flag. So the flag was created, or the maker of the flag, Mary Pinkersgill, was commissioned by the Army to make this flag. Now, here's the kicker, and what I also found was kind of crazy, and it brings to light the significance of this flag. The flag was 42 feet by 30 feet. If you need a point of reference, it's about the size of a basketball court. A basketball court. This flag was the size of a basketball court. So now I get a little bit of why the flag held like this big sort of majesty. Okay, The flag was commissioned for $400 back in around 1814 or 1813, I believe, is when it was commissioned. It was commissioned for $400. Today, that would be around $8,000 to $10,000, adjusting for inflation. Gotcha. Massive flag. So now when you hear that it was torn apart by cannon fire from British ships, I was thinking, how do you even hit a small flag? Boom. The flag was the size of a basketball court. If you're interested, you can actually go see the pieces of the flag that are remaining there at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Another tidbit about that flag is that free African Americans assisted in sewing this flag. I don't think anybody would be surprised about that. But it does kind of set a bit of the backdrop for there were free or non-enslaved Americans that were of African descent, and there were enslaved people of African descent. So I think that's important to note in this period. So let's kind of shift gears. That's a bit of the story from the perspective of the non-enslaved Americans and their attachment to this scenario, this flag, and so on. Now let's shift gears to the enslaved Americans at this time. So, first things first, the first enslaved Americans were brought to American shores in the great state of Virginia, home 757 stand up, gotcha, 1619. The Star-Spangled Banner was written in 1814. Okay. Almost 200 years into slavery, the song was written. Fast forward all the way to the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. Okay. So you have 1814 and 1863. That's about 50 years that this poem / song, the Star-Spangled Banner, has existed and had tremendous popularity in military settings and all across the country. And then in 1863, slavery was abolished or ended. So for 50 years almost, if you were an enslaved American, you had to listen to people sing a song that said that America was the land of the free and the home of the brave. Gotcha. That's significant here because that's where the theme comes from. The land of the free for almost 50 years was simultaneously the home of the slave. And as we know, now celebrated as a national holiday, Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, was when the last group of people were notified that they were no longer enslaved. That's significant to me. And that's why the theme of this month is centered around that. The contradiction that exists in that song. And I really do wonder what it would have been like to hear that song as an enslaved person. Now, if I gave into my imagination, then I'm just going to think, if I understand what is being said at that time, it's almost hurtful to some degree. But if I really look into it and get down to the nitty gritty, where the rubber meets the road, those song lyrics can be just as inspirational to the battle that enslaved Americans were fighting with non-enslaved Americans. So now we have a parallel, almost like a point that both sides can hang an argument on. The song and its relevance to the battle that was being fought with the British, between the Americans and the British, and then the battle for freedom that was being fought internally between the non-enslaved Americans and the enslaved Americans. Like I said, this is where the rubber meets the road. So I want to explore the lyrics, and I think most people in the US will get the lyrics, but for anybody who, has not been exposed to this song as much as we have, pause. Go on a little tangent here because, again, my best friend is not from the United States. She pointed out something to me that I think is also very relevant. And that's that before every single sporting event and what feels like anything that is televised, that is like a live thing, not like a production show, we have the national anthem that is played. She thought that we have like this obsession with the national anthem. Like, why do we have to make this a part of everything that we do? Like sporting events, it's a sporting event. Why does it have to become a national thing or a thing of nationalism? I didn't realize how true that was until I thought about soccer, and I thought about Formula One and some other international sports activities that I pay close attention to. And I realized they don't necessarily make that such a prominent part of the video production or the live broadcast as we do. We make that a part of every single broadcast, which means we put the emphasis on that song to this day and have always. It reminds me of the way we used to stand up every day in school and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And again, I would not consider myself to be someone who is anti-patriotic or quote unquote like un-American, these terms that get thrown around very easily. I would not consider myself to be one of those people. I just consider myself to be a person who, when I talk to my children about the Pledge of Allegiance, I ask, do you understand what you are saying? And I made a request of them. If you do not understand what you are reciting every day, don't say it. Don't say it until you understand what it means, because you are making a commitment with your words, just like you do with every single other word that you utter, especially those that are heard by others. So it's important what these words mean. And I want to, just kind of say them out loud for the broadcast. So it starts with the namesake for this episode. Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Okay, new day. It was dark. Dark period of time. All right, gotcha. Plays for both. It plays for those who were doing battle with the British, and it plays for those who were embattled in bondage or slavery, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, or the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming. Okay. It's the flag. Bet. Got it. There's a perilous fight going on, and we are watching. We're watching from behind a wall or on the other side of this whole deal. So we may not be actively involved. The everyday American may not have been involved in the battles with the British. Okay, cool. The everyday enslaved person wasn't necessarily out fighting the battle with non-enslaved people or their owners for freedom, but they could see it. They can always see it. And they can see that flag that represents the land that they were having this experience in. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. What's the rockets? What's the bombs? For those doing battle with the British, okay, it's a literal translation, same thing. For those who may have been enslaved at this time, the rocket's red glare, They may have been whips on someone's back. They may have been observing the treatment and breeding of enslaved people as if they were livestock. They may have also been in the midst of a battle for their mind, because this is not where they came from. This is not the life that they lived. So there is the battle of the mind that is happening. And every single word, every single demeaning act, every single thing that beat them down was like a bomb coming at them, hitting them for all to see and for those who are hit to feel. But this dark period that they're coming out of, they see that this flag is still there. So if you're fighting against the British, that flag represents freedom. And if you are battled with slavery, that flag still represents freedom. Oh, say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. That flag waves throughout this battle. It continues to wave. And for the non-enslaved, it represents this land of the free and the home of the brave. And for the enslaved American, it still represents this land of the free, a land where they can and should be free. But that could only be realized if they embody that last word and become brave enough to fight for it. So I believe the lyrics can be inspirational to both sides, for the non-enslaved Americans and the enslaved Americans. It's just how they take it, how the mind is processing that information. And you can see that there are two different perspectives. We're fighting with the British, but they may not realize that there's also a fight going on in their own country between those who are enslaved and those who are not enslaved. So the reverence for the flag that the song portrays, it sticks out to me. And I think this is really where the crosses kind of meet explosively. There is a reverence for the flag, but the enslaved Americans actually were the flag that they were revering. They were battered, beaten, torn, and almost destroyed by what they were going through. But they were still there. They stayed, they fought, and eventually gained their freedom. So, just as much as that flag is celebrated by the national anthem, the enslaved Americans were that flag. And that's exactly how I see it. And that should allow us to take a path that is a little bit closer together than it was before. Because there is a love for that flag. And if you love what that flag embodied for the non-enslaved Americans, then you gotta understand, you don't have to, but you have an option to understand how the enslaved Americans went through a similar experience as the flag that you loved. So that's where the rubber meets the road for me. If you're feeling the message of the podcast and you're the kind of person who wears your heart on your sleeve or on your chest, we'll have experiencerelativity.com up soon. It's currently under construction, and this will be a place where you can grab merchandise and represent your support for Experience Relativity. It's not only about representing your experience, but it's about engaging conversations that are productive, but also challenging, that bring us closer together. If we sit at opposite ends of a table, communicating our experience with the world in between us, they see it and will never make progress. It's about conversations that we are willing to be open to having in close proximity to one another. Here is where the unique and nuanced experiences can be shared. That is where reflex empathy can be developed. So I'm not preaching. That's for my father, Elder Smith. I'm just making a suggestion. Let me also make a suggestion that you tune in to the next episode of Experience Relativity. You know the usual, like and subscribe. The podcast will still be available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify and wherever else you hear your pods. I appreciate your presence. It's always met with gratitude. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Experience Relativity.
Experience Relativity.
Experience Relativity.
Experience Relativity.